So what I told my children is I said there's really only two worldviews. Like there's thousands, right? We could talk about Marxism and environmentalism and feminism, and we could talk about all kinds of different critical race theory, and we could talk about all kinds of different isms and ideologies and belief systems, right? But ultimately there's only two. Everything boils down to two. One is humanism, and that is that
Hmm.
man is the center of all things, and the other is biblical Christianity.
Hmm.
Those are the only two worldviews that actually exist. Everything that's not biblical Christianity is ultimately humanism. It's man knowing there's a problem, but thinking that he can solve his own problems by his own strength, his own effort, his own merit. And
Hmm.
it's putting himself as the final arbiter of truth, the final solution to the problems. And so, regardless of what you think the problem in the world is, every effort that you bring to it is just you trying to solve the problems in your own strength, or humanity trying to do so in their collective strength. And
Hmm.
so it's very easy for us to be humanists functionally, even though we're confessional Christians.
Welcome to today's episode where I have a very exciting guest. Israel Wayne is with me today, and we are going to talk about one of my favorite topics, and I think one of his, which is homeschooling with a biblical worldview. So I would like Israel to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about his family and what he does.
Well, Nikki, it is an honor to be on your podcast. I'm excited that you're doing this. I hope that this continues to grow and is a very beneficial project for you, and I know it will be for your listeners. But I'm a homeschool graduate. I'm married a homeschool graduate, and my wife and I have homeschooled our 11 children in Southwest Michigan from birth. And so I grew up not only being homeschooled, but I grew up a bit in the homeschool publishing world. My mother started a homeschool magazine in 1988, and I started working as director of marketing for that publishing company. The publishing company grew out of the one magazine to eventually we had like three magazines and published books and did a lot of conferences and events and things like that. But I worked for her publishing company for 20 years, from January of 1993 until summer of 2013. And so, spent my whole adult life working in the homeschool publishing world. I wrote my first book on homeschooling in 2000, and I guess I actually started speaking at homeschool conferences in 1995 because my mother was an author and conference speaker, and I was her roadie. So I would go along and manage the book table while she spoke at events. But then I was one of the earlier homeschool graduates. I actually graduated from homeschooling in Texas in 1991, and I think it became legal in 92, if I remember the history
94.
right.
94.
94. Okay.
Yeah.
I knew it was not yet.
Yeah.
I'd been homeschooled most of my growing up years in Maryland, but and
Okay.
finished my high school in Texas in 91. And there just weren't that many homeschoolers that
No.
had graduated back then, And so as my mom was kind of like keynote speaking a lot of these conferences, some of the coordinators started asking me, hey, we've never heard from a homeschool graduate before.
Yeah.
Would you mind doing a workshop maybe for teenagers, or just one to tell your experience of what it was like being homeschooled? And so that was what most of my early sessions were, like being on a discussion panel or doing a teen
Hmm.
track or just doing a novelty kind of session on my experience being homeschooled. And then occasionally they would let me talk on a different topic. And I know one of the first messages I ever did on homeschooling, this was back in 95, I did a session on what about socialization?
Oh.
And it was apparently very compelling to a room full of adults.
Wow.
And people pretty soon started saying, not just, oh, Israel's a good teen speaker, but he's a good speaker. And
Okay.
so I've been doing homeschool conference speaking for over 30 years now. Um, and then in July of 2013, my wife and I decided to go full time with just writing and speaking. And so I started Family Renewal, My sister came along to help me with my bookings and event coordination and all of that. And so we have been doing that since July of 2013. Very similar to what I was doing before, still advocating, writing, and publishing and all that on homeschooling. But I signed with Master Books and New Leaf Publishing Group back in
Hmm.
2013 and have been with them ever since. In fact, they've been my exclusive publisher since then. And so I've kind of let them have the headache of running a publishing company because for those who dream of doing that,
Are you saying don't?
sorry. So I'm still in therapy over it, but you make a lot more money when you publish your own books, but you have a
Hmm.
lot more headache. And
Yeah.
so anyway, it was a trade-off. I was like, I think I'll let you guys make the money and you can keep the headaches. And so anyway, we've had a good relationship over the last 12 years or so. And but it's been my whole life. Oh, and I'm also vice president of the Michigan State Homeschool Association. It's
Okay.
called Michigan Christian Homeschool Network, and I've been with them for I think about 11 years on the
Okay.
board, and that's all volunteer. Our whole board is
Mhm.
made up of volunteers, as most state homeschool associations are. It's usually
Yeah.
just homeschooling parents that feel a need to give back to the homeschool community and volunteer their time. And so I'm grateful to be able to serve in that capacity here in the state of Michigan, where I live as well.
Well, that is a lot. You do serve the homeschool community well. I've enjoyed hearing you at conventions myself, and so I'm excited for anyone who hasn't heard you speak today to really hear you talk about worldview because I know that that's something you're passionate about, but being a homeschool graduate, I think adds another layer of understanding, because I notice new homeschoolers are typically worried about the top level stuff, where do I get my books? How do I schedule this? What about the baby who's crying? How do I make a transcript? But after a couple years, they start realizing there is something much deeper here going on, and I need to address that. And that is, what am I preparing my kids for? And what is a biblical worldview? And so you have done a really good job of addressing that in your book, Education, Does God Have an Opinion? For anyone that hasn't seen it, this is an incredible book. Mine's all marked up and dog-eared, but I like it because it talks about the biblical perspective of education, which even many Christians still don't talk about. They talk about, reading the Bible, which is good, and going to church, but the biblical view of education. So, can you tell me a little bit about how you wrote this book, why, and what is the heart of that book?
Well, the book really came together. In one sense, it was a 25-year project to finish it. As I said, I wrote my first book on homeschooling in 2000 and had the nucleus of it there. I had the skeleton of it. But then, you give it some time and you're able to kind of think of better ways to frame it
Yep.
and to word it better and explain it better. And so the education book, I think, was just a really just finally, I think it was the book that the timing was right for it to come out and say, everything that I wanted to say. When we talk about the issue of education from a biblical worldview, it's so hard to compress that into a soundbite. Like if someone says,
Yes,
"What is
it is.
education from a biblical worldview?" It's so hard to answer.
That's why the book is well worth your time.
And so, I'm grateful that we have 250 pages in the book that I can talk to, really extrapolate it and explain what it is. But I explained it yesterday to my children in our family Bible time. And I do this a lot because I think we have to be repetitious with
Yeah.
our own families, with our own children. But I find that if I don't back out and give our family the 30,000-foot view of why we're doing what we're doing, then we can just lose sight of the whole thing because we're so focused on the nuts and bolts and the micro details and just
Yep.
making it through the day and checking off lists and all of that we forget why we're doing what we're doing. And so I'll just try to explain real quickly what I said to my own children in my living room
Okay.
yesterday. Um, I said the thing is most people have who call themselves Christians live with a framework or a viewpoint of what I call compartmentalized Christianity. And it involves what theologians call, and I'm sorry for using big terms, hopefully people hang in with me here, but theologians call it the sacred secular dichotomy. And what that means is that our life is split into two basic realms. We have a sacred realm of our life, and then we have a secular realm of our life. And the sacred realm of our life is usually quite small, and it contains going to church, reading the Bible, saying the sinner's prayer, giving some money to the church, maybe volunteering at the church. If we're
Mm-hmm.
super spiritual, like small group, like listening to K-Love in the radio as we drive around. Like we have a little
Yeah.
slice, an Our Daily Bread devotional. Something that we have a spiritual slice. I often refer to it as the spiritual box. And we put all our spiritual things in our spiritual box. But then we have all of the rest of our life that basically is secular. Our job, our friendships, our entertainment choices, our hobbies, where we vacation, the books we read, just what influences us, what shapes our thinking, whether it's video games or whether it's hiking or just, whatever our vocation or avocation is. We're a mechanic or we run a restaurant or whatever. But our
Yeah.
faith doesn't find a way to integrate that very well for the most part. And so the way that most people develop their worldview, I think, is largely formed and created because of the schooling that they experience. And they
Mhm.
experience this split, this sacred secular split, if you will, in the schools, because when they go to school, you shut off the Jesus stuff. We
Mhm.
don't do that here. We don't need Jesus in the math classroom. We don't need Jesus in the
Mhm.
science classroom. We're fine without Jesus here. So Jesus has a place. Like if you want to do Jesus, that's fine. That's cool. That's up to you. Okay. But you do that at home privately on your own time, and
Mhm.
and you do that at church or wherever you do your whatever religion you want to do. You do that off campus. You don't do that here. This is not a space for that. And so basically what they learn is that there's spaces for these religious activities, and then there's spaces where we just don't do the religious activities don't even fit. Like they're not even a
Right.
part. They don't play into it in any way, shape, or form. And so if you go to public school, that's your experience. Now, if you go to Christian school, this is why I don't get myself in trouble. Not with you, but I'm gonna get you in trouble with your
Go for
listeners right about
it.
now. If you go to Christian school, you get a slightly modified version of that,
Mhm.
where you basically get that, except for you get a Bible class
Mhm.
and then you get chapel,
Chapel.
right? And
Yep.
so your religious or sacred sphere there is like chapel and Bible class.
Mhm.
And then the rest of the time is pretty close to what you get at public school. Now, I will say, I think in some places that's changing and improving. I'm grateful for that. I think there are some
Yes. Mhm.
even Christian school publishers that are becoming much more intentional. And I'll just throw out a name for fun. Bob Jones Press is one that has
Mhm.
become much more intentional about
Mhm.
integrating biblical worldview into all of their subjects at all of their grade levels than they were 20 years ago.
Mhm.
So I,
Yes.
I think there are pockets where that is improving in the Christian world space, but Christian school space. But traditionally, that's maybe I'm oversimplifying it a little bit. We'll get some pushback on that, but I think for the most part it's
I
true.
don't think so. I attended 1 year of Christian school after homeschooling for 6 years. And it was a small one, and it was a Christian school run by a church, but at least half the teachers were not even Christians. And like you said, it was chapel and then it was public school curriculum. So we were in a church building and a couple of the teachers were Christians, but there was
Yeah.
no biblical worldview taught. There was nothing different from what a public school had been. So I don't think you're oversimplifying it at all.
Yeah, so there still is that sort of sacred secular dichotomy that happens even within the Christian school. And so people who are raised in those two environments, even if they start homeschooling, that's still their template. And
Yep.
so, like their academics, I know a lot of people say, I'm a Christian, but I don't bring Christianity into like our academics.
Right.
And that's that sacred secular
They're
dichotomy.
trying to be
That's the
neutral.
Yeah, exactly. Like we have this religiously neutral space over here, and we'll do Bible time, okay? And that's where we're going to talk about Jesus. That's where we're going to do
Yeah.
religion. But then we have this secular education that we're giving our children. So what I told my children is, I said, there's really like two worldviews. Like there's thousands, right? We could talk about Marxism and environmentalism and feminism, and we could talk about all kinds of different critical race theory, and we could talk about all kinds of different isms and ideologies and belief systems, right? But ultimately, there's only two. Everything boils down to two. One is humanism, and that is that
Hmm.
man is the center of all things, and the other is biblical Christianity.
Hmm.
Those are the only two worldviews that actually exist. Everything that's not biblical Christianity is ultimately humanism. It's man knowing there's a problem, but thinking that he can solve his own problems by his own strength, his own effort, his own merit. And
Hmm.
it's putting himself as the final arbiter of truth, the final solution to the problems. And so, regardless of what you think the problem in the world is, every effort that you bring to it is just you trying to solve the problems in your own strength, or humanity trying to do so in their collective strength. And
Hmm.
so it's very easy for us to be humanists functionally, even though we're confessional Christians.
Yeah.
So we make a profession of faith and we say we believe in Jesus. We think he died on the cross to save us from our sins so we can go to heaven when we die. And that's our little sacred sphere, right? But then the
Hmm.
whole rest of our life is very much about us being king of our life and doing whatever we want to do to please ourselves. And we tend to look at almost everything in life as being um, a means or an end to us ex avoid, well, I would say it comes down for most people to avoiding pain and pursuing pleasure. Now, that is a primary motivator for most people. They want to be comfortable,
That's
they want to
true.
be affluent, they want to be recognized, they want to be respected, they want to have fun, they want to have things that they own that bring them some self-worth or
Hmm.
satisfaction. But all what is all of that? It's all of that is humanism, right? And so it's very easy to look at the things that we do and that we study, like let's say in homeschooling, from a humanistic framework. And I often ask parents, like, why do you teach your children math? And they'll say, well, I teach my children math because they need it for the real world. Okay, so why do they need it for the real world? Well, you need math if you're going to be able to have a job and make money and support a family. And I go, okay, so why is it important to have a job and make money? Well, because you have to pay your bills and you have to survive and buy groceries and keep your electric on. And okay, right,
Hmm.
but like for what purpose? Well, for what purpose do you have to do all of that? And it's amazing how people just will shut down in the conversation, not even get where I'm going with it. Like they're just like, I don't even know what you're talking about. I don't know where you're going with it. And so, what I try to communicate to people is like life has ends and means. And
Hmm.
there's very few actual ends in life. Almost everything in life is a means to an end.
Yeah.
And people pursue some things as an end, like money or a house or a car or a boat or whatever, like that's an end, or a retirement account or whatever, like I worked my whole life for this, right? But in reality, almost everything we have is a means. Like an education is a means, a high school diploma is a means, a college degree is a means, a job is a means to what? Like to a paycheck. Money is a means to something, to buying something. But then all the things that you buy are a means to something else. A
Hmm.
phone, a laptop, a car. They're all means to something, right? And what is that too? Well, they're means that help you do what you're supposed to do with your life.
Hmm.
And what are you supposed to do with your life? Well, you either live to, know, love, and serve yourself, or you live to know, love, and serve God and love and serve others. And so I asked my children as we were doing Bible time yesterday, I said, why do you think we're studying all this Bible stuff? What's the point of all of this? Why do we study the Bible? Of course, I got some blank looks, and I realized like I have younger children, and I haven't had this chat with my 3-year-old and my 5-year-old, and my 8-year-old probably doesn't remember it as well as she should. You know what I'm saying? Like you have to
Hmm.
repeat, put these things on repeat
You do.
when you have large
Yeah.
families, and you can't assume like, oh, I've taught the younger ones this because sometimes you forget you
They
haven't
were
done it.
they were babies.
Yeah, for sure. And so anyway, I said, we have to think about why we study even the Bible. And so finally, I got one of my older ones to say, well, we study the Bible to know God, right? And why do we need to know God? Well, we need to know God because, obviously we want to worship him and we want to love him and serve him and be in relationship with him. And right. And so, and then what's the outworking of that? Once we come to know God and who he is and what he's done for us and all that, then what is our response to that? Well, then we want to love and serve him by loving and serving other people. And so, and then so I flipped it and I said, so then why do we study math? And the reason we study math and science and history and language arts and all of those other subjects is exactly the same reason we study the Bible. And it's the same reason we study church history. And it's the same reason that we study, theological topics like, or like, right now we're doing a whole series on the Puritans, just kind of a church history thing. And I
Mm-hmm.
asked him, I said, why are we studying the Puritans? What do you think is the goal for us in trying to learn about the Anabaptists or the Puritans or whoever it is that we're studying? What's the goal of this? Of course, again, sometimes you get blank looks. And I said, the goal of it is hopefully for us to know God better
Mm-hmm.
and to love God more and be better equipped to love and serve him and be better prepared for what God wants us to do in our life. And so everything that we study is ultimately helping to equip us and prepare us for a life that glorifies God,
Mm-hmm.
and that is given to the love and service of other people. I think most Christian homeschoolers don't keep that in front of their eyes and they don't keep it in front of their children's eyes. They're very much like you have to learn these subjects so that you can finish high school, so that you can go to college, so you can get a college degree, so that you can have a career. What is that? You're pointing them towards. There's a secular author named Neil Postman years ago who called that worldview the God of economic utility.
Wow.
This like you get an education. He wrote a book on education, and he wasn't even a believer, but he said that it's like your whole emphasis on education is to teach someone that they need all these 13 years of K-12 and then higher education all that so they can work a job and make money. And he even saw the
Yeah.
futility of it, not even being a
Yeah.
Christian. He's like, there has to be something more than that. And so there's a lot more that I do say, a lot more that can be said about a worldview. In fact, in one sense, the way I answered that is not a typical standard what is a worldview answer even. But I think that for me, I want to constantly bring back to my children, are we functional humanists or are
Mm-hmm.
we actually functional Christians? Because I don't
That's
want to
really
just be
good.
confessing Christians and functional humanists. I don't want
Mm-hmm.
to just say, well, we love Jesus, but then every day of our life is about us and it's about how we can make our lives happier and more successful by our definition of happy and successful. And so I think for parents, the goal for them is to constantly remind their kids that when we're studying poetry, we're studying literature, and we're studying European history, and we're studying the War of 1812, whatever it is that we're studying, the end goal of all of that is ultimately that we want to know God, we want to understand his ways, and we want to be prepared for life and understand life so that we can live truthfully, so that we can serve other people ethically, and so that we can really do everything that we do to the glory of God. That's really, I think, the essence of a biblical worldview when it comes to education. And I know almost no Christian schools that are about that. And
No,
I know very few Christian
very few.
homeschoolers that really stay on task with that. Maybe they see it glimpses of it for a minute,
Mhm.
but I know even in our family, I'm the guy that wrote the book, and yet I have to circle the wagons in my own home
Yeah.
and remind us all, why are we doing this? What's the point of all this? Because it's so easy to just drift. And I think that's a risk
Yeah.
that we all have as Christian homeschoolers.
I agree. One of the things that I focus on a lot now is, your curriculum is more than just a math book with some Bible verses on the bottom of each page, or, the history book is not separate. We often divide our histories even. Church history is over here, Bible history is here, and then you got world history, but the Bible is world history and church history is world history. And when you put it all together, you see the hand of God. You see when
Hmm.
God blessed the people that blessed him and cursed the people that cursed him. You see the outcome of people that did not love God and
Yeah.
rebelled against him. But you also see the effect that Christianity had in changing the world, whether it was geography or the
Hmm.
arts. There's so many hundreds and thousands of ways that the hand of God shows up in history, and most curriculum doesn't address that. Or like you said, it's segmented. It's a Bible class or it's a church history class, but putting it all together just is so eye-opening. Even for I was homeschooled and I still find things that I just think, wow, I did not know that happened, or I didn't realize these things happened at the same time and this was the result. And so as a homeschooler, myself, if I didn't see it all, I can guarantee most other adults don't because we don't have resources that integrate that like the rest of the world used to 200 years ago. So we talked about the fact that Christian schools rarely do this. Obviously, public schools don't do it. Homeschool curriculum companies, some do very, very well, and some are more of the what I call just a kind of generic Christian curriculum with Bible verses
Hmm.
integrated.
Hmm.
Um, so um, you have a chapter on homeschooling I think the subtitle is A Response to God or Not a Reaction to Public Schools, or a section in there. So what is the difference between a response and not a reaction?
I think honestly, honestly think there's sometimes is a place for a reaction. I think in my book I said that shouldn't be our motivation, but I mean, people's kids are getting shot and their kids are being sexually molested and they're being offered drugs and they're being, in some cases, um, trafficked, and I know here in Michigan, I had a legislator tell me that there was a bill that was being written. I don't think it ever got introduced, but was being written that would have legalized the ability to fly a minor child to California to have reassignment surgery and flown back without their parents' knowledge or consent.
Wow.
I mean, can you imagine?
That's
Like we're on the
awful.
cusp of that,
Yeah.
honestly, legally within our
Yeah.
country. We're like right there. And this legislator, as a female legislator, she told me she's like, these are the people who work in the Michigan education establishment, the government schools in Michigan.
Mm.
She's like, they want this, and so I think there's a time and a place, for parents of
Mhm.
common sense, even those that don't come from a religious background, to just go, this is craziness. These males who are dominating female sports
Mhm.
and entering girls' locker rooms and bathrooms, and schools that are putting menstruating products in boys' bathrooms. It's insane. And
It is.
so, I was trying to say in my book, like our motivation as Christians shouldn't be reaction against what's bad in the public schools. We should be
Hmm.
motivated proactively by our theology,
Hmm.
that we should make our decisions based on what has God prescribed, what has God commanded us to do. And I believe that. I think it's a better motivation. And for me, that's why I homeschool. I don't
Hmm.
care if the best Christian school in the world is down the street from my house. I'm still homeschooling.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I'm not
Yeah.
reacting against that best Christian school in the world, like, oh, I hate them, they're bad people and they do terrible things. That's not my motive. I'm homeschooling my kids because only I can give my children me.
Yes.
No one else can do that. And
I think
so
a lot
that's
of
why,
people start out with the reaction, there
yeah,
is a
yeah,
reason everybody who has had their kids in public
yeah,
school gets them out. Everybody's got a reason.
exactly. And I
And
think it's
then,
legit,
yeah,
right?
it
I mean,
is
yeah,
so many reasons. And then
yeah,
they come to realize there is so much more.
for
And
sure.
I
And
think
so
that's what's
ultimately,
important here.
yeah, ultimately, I hope we land not on we homeschool because we had a bad teacher or our child had
Yeah.
a bad experience or they were being bullied or whatever. I hope ultimately we develop a biblical theology of education and we look at what did God actually plan for families. And one of the shortcuts to this is, go through the Bible just real quickly and find me any verses in the Bible where God tells you to send your children to the government to be educated.
Yep.
Send me that list. And then as soon as you're done that, go ahead and then make the other list of tell me every place in the Bible where God commands you to send your child to the church to be educated.
Hmm.
I think you'll find those are very, very short lists with
They
like zero
are.
verses
Good
in them.
luck with that.
Yeah. And
But who
so
does God tell to educate the children?
time and time again, dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of times, he tells parents to. And this is the thing that we don't know that's in the scripture. Because we just don't study it and we don't look at it, and sermons aren't based on it, and pastors don't know it, so they don't teach about it. And even within theological seminaries, pastors are not taught about a biblical theology of education or a biblical theology of family life for the most
Yeah.
part. They learn a lot of other things, and they have a pretty humanistic view of
Hmm.
education and family life, and that gets passed on in the churches, sadly. And
Yes.
so I think that I wanted to, in my book, Education Does God Have an Opinion? I wanted to really lay out what is a biblical philosophy of education, and then what is a biblical philosophy of every subject. Because I think
Oh.
there's a humanistic philosophy of every subject and a biblical philosophy of every subject. And I believe we will teach every subject either humanistically
Hmm.
or biblically, depending on our starting points and our lenses, if you will. And so, as a parent, you have to know what the biblical philosophy of art is, or a biblical philosophy of music, or a biblical philosophy of history, or science, or language arts, or geography, or any other subject, before you can teach it to your child. And so, this is a book to help parents learn how to develop that biblical philosophy of education and teach it to their children. Let me just give a quick example of how this came up again yesterday in conversation with a couple of my teen daughters.
Okay.
Um, my wife and I just had our 26th wedding anniversary, and we went to Chicago just for a day, to have a kind of little mini vacation.
Hmm.
And so we went to the Chicago Museum of Art. And we're not like massive art aficionados, but we're kind of in an age in our life where I think we're old enough to start appreciating some things like that. You go through as a teenager and you just are bored out of your mind. But one of the things that Chicago Institute of Art specializes in is Impressionist art. And so they
Okay.
have a lot of Renoirs and Renaults and Van Goghs and so on, and just a very large gallery of Impressionist art. And then, a fairly small, in my opinion, selection of the Dutch art, which I appreciate
Mhm.
much more. But I was talking to them about when we went through these two galleries, how almost all of the Impressionist art was whimsical, it was airy, it was kind of mystical a little bit, and it just dreamy, I guess would be a term that I would use for it.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was um, beaches with people walking with umbrellas and strolling in parks, and there was almost never any kind of family life
Hmm.
demonstrated. It was almost all free time, kind of vacation. Even the still life stuff was just very kind of detached from real life. And yet, because we're doing this church history study on the Puritans, they influenced the Dutch painters very much, and their
Hmm.
their theology influenced how they painted. So you have a lot of the French Enlightenment
Yeah.
philosophy influencing Impressionism, and then Protestant Reformation theology influencing Dutch paintings with more of the Van Goghs and the Albrecht Dürers and so on. And,
Hmm.
and so I said, you look at these Dutch paintings, what do they often focus on? What do they emphasize? Everyday family life.
Yeah.
It's
Home
moms with
scene.
their kids, they're making food, and the children are playing in the kitchen floor, next to them, and
Hmm.
the children are chasing a cat around or what, you know. And I said so many people portray the Puritans as just being like they hated fun and they didn't like life, and
Yeah.
that's true. Um, and so, they valued what people today would call the mundane. They
Mm-hmm.
valued simply doing life together as a family and being together as a family and nurturing your children. And they painted in
Mm-hmm.
a very realistic framework. They didn't try to make people look glamorous. They weren't
Yeah.
dreaming about a vacation where they could get away. They were very content and happy in the everyday of life. Why? Because they saw it as worship.
Mm-hmm.
Because their life wasn't split into this sacred secular dualism. Everything that they did, whether they're making shoes or building wood furniture or making candles or preparing dinner or teaching their children, was an act of worship to God. Everything was sacred because God cares about every bit of our life. Everything is spiritual from God's viewpoint. There's not this non-spiritual part of our life. Everything, because we're spiritual, everything that we interface with is, can be an act of worship. And so just even in talking about art and viewing art, and thinking about what makes this French Impressionist art so different from this Protestant Dutch art,
Mm-hmm.
um, the late 16th century or 17th century. What makes it so different? Well, their worldview, their religion,
Yeah.
really, and
That's an
those are
excellent
things that when you
example.
have the right template, you can teach a biblical worldview of every subject to your kids, but you have to
Yes.
know what that looks like, and so that's what I try to do in my book.
Speaking of biblical worldview, the number of people in America, American Christians that have a biblical worldview is such a small number. Do you remember what the latest number on that is?
Yeah, well, we have the new 2024 study from Arizona Christian University, which is where Dr. George Barna is now doing his
Mm-hmm.
research. He sold off Barna Group, interestingly, so that's not
Oh,
even George
okay.
Barna anymore. He's at Arizona Christian University, but
Okay.
the one that sticks in my mind is like 6%
That's what I was thinking.
of yeah, but I think that's like 6% of those who profess faith. I don't even think it's
Right.
6% of Americans. I think it's
So that's a very small
significantly
number.
lower. But
And
yeah, well,
how
of like of
are
those who
they,
profess to be Christians, it's like
right?
6%.
How are they going to give this biblical worldview to their children if they don't have it? And that's something I run into just talking to
Well, and
moms.
here's another thing though. Barna's standard for biblical worldview is lower than yours and mine.
Yeah. Yeah.
I respect
It's,
Barna. I mean, he's a great man. I love Barna. I've read his books for years. I had him on my podcast. Great guy. But I'm saying, like, what he asks for biblical worldview is, do you believe Jesus rose from the dead? Do you believe the Bible is the
hmm
inspired word of God? Do you believe the Holy
hmm
Spirit is a real entity? Do you believe that absolute moral truth exists? Like, those are the questions Barna asks. He asks like 10 of them. And then he's like, if you affirm these, which are like the most basic, elemental,
Yeah.
get you in the door Christian statement of faith, he's like, if you answer these 10 questions affirmatively, you have a biblical worldview. And he's saying like
Only
6%
6%
professing Christians
of
sign up
Christians.
on that. Like what
Yeah.
we're talking about is a whole nother level of
Yes.
biblical worldview. So if you were to take, like, do you know how to talk about economics from a biblical worldview? And do you know how to talk about the difference between, impressionist versus Protestant art? Like, do you have the ability, capacity to speak about literature? What makes Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn an anti-Christian book? You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? Like, those are things that most Christian, I don't know, you don't even get to 1%. You couldn't even get to 1%
No,
if you're actually talking about applying a biblical framework to all areas of life.
all areas.
It's got to be so small. And
Yeah.
I'm indebted. I think you know these people. I'm just going to throw a name out, but um, when I was 13 years old, I was at a homeschool conference in Virginia, and oh no, sorry, I was 14, and there was a guy and his wife there who had a table and they had some like pictures of paintings and some classical music CDs sitting out, and they had this little company that the little homeschool booth, and
hmm
for some reason, providentially, I felt strangely drawn to their booth, and it was David and Shirley Quine
Oh, yeah.
from Dallas, Texas area, and they were very influential early on in helping me to understand what biblical worldview was.
hmm
And David helped to point me towards Dr. Francis Schaeffer, whose
hmm
books changed my life. And so, I want to kind of tip my hat in a way because Well, I think that what I've written in the Education Does God Have an Opinion book is probably the, I hate to say this about your own book, probably the best all in one place, one-stop shopping, like education from a biblical worldview
Hmm.
book, in
I
just
think
one
so.
book. But, that book probably would have never been written had the Quines not put in, decades of work that I was able to learn from and draw from. And there are many, many others as well, but I just want to
Hmm.
mention them because, in one sense, like we all just sort of build on the work of other people. And
Hmm.
so I wouldn't know what I know if the Lord hadn't providentially led me to their booth at 14 years old and them had the
Yeah.
I don't know, had the patience to not run me out or call security because I stood there for like what was a weekend conference. My mom was there and I was bored. And so I just hung out at their booth and just riddled them with questions the whole time. I don't think
That's
they
so
even
funny.
remember it, but but later we became friends. But very grateful for the work that they've done. So there were a few people even back in the 80s that were
Hmm.
starting to introduce this, and they were one of
Yes.
the cutting edge voices on that.
Well, when my parents were first introduced to homeschooling, it was in the 80s, in 83, and the curriculum choices were very few then. And they did use the ACE curriculum, which, it had the Bible verses on all the pages, and some of the subjects were more biblically oriented. But what this couple that mentored my parents taught them was teach your kids the Bible, read it together, memorize it together. And my parents weren't taught anything about worldview classes or anything like that, but they were taught to teach the Bible. And that's what they
Hmm.
did. And they were brand new
Hmm.
Christians, but they took that advice, and just having grown up reading the Bible and memorizing portions of scripture, that did set the foundation for a worldview. And, like you said, not to brag, but I noticed so many situations growing up where I could recognize something. I could recognize the biblical worldview of something on the news, and other people didn't see it. And I thought, why doesn't anyone else see that? But it was because of their lack of the
Yeah.
biblical foundation. They didn't know what God had already said about those things. And like, I remember when the crocodile hunter died, and
Mm.
because he was bitten by the creature that he was holding in the ocean, he knew he was going to die, and he let them save the creature instead of him. And I remember thinking, God put us in dominion over the animals. And but the crocodile hunter didn't have that worldview. And so he gave his life so that an animal could live, which sounds admirable unless you understand the biblical worldview. And he left his children without a father because he put that animal first. I mean, there's so many different ways that a basic understanding of scripture gives you the biblical worldview without a fancy course, and so many people haven't grown up with that. Even Christians haven't read the Bible with their children, and that is a huge, huge mistake. So,
Yeah, for sure. And I would add to that when we read the Bible, again, part of the biblical worldview is avoiding that sacred secular dichotomy
hmm.
so that we don't want to teach the Bible in the sense of children, we need to read the Bible so that we can be saved.
Hmm.
I mean, we do need to read the Bible so we can be
Right.
saved. I'm not saying don't. What I'm saying is it doesn't end there, right?
It's more. Yeah.
That the Bible talks about a Christianity or a faith that is for all of life.
Hmm.
It's not just to save us so we can go to heaven when we die. It's to teach us how to marry the right person. And it's to teach us how to make wise life choices and
Hmm.
how to make ethical decisions and how to manage our finances and for what reason we manage our finances
Hmm.
and how to run a business and how to treat your coworkers or your employees properly. And
Yeah.
it's a roadmap for all of life about relationships and just how the universe works. And
Hmm.
so I think that's the thing that we have to be careful when we teach the Bible, that we don't teach it as something over here in the sacred
Yeah.
sphere that doesn't translate or cross the barrier over into all the rest of our secular existence. But we really teach our children how to apply this into
Hmm.
every facet of your life, into every decision that you make, and again, how you interpret movies and how you understand the news
Yes.
and all of those things. Because um, I saw a guy yesterday who was running for a political office here in Michigan as a supposed conservative. And I was kind of surprised because he's been very pro homeschool. I've had a little dialogue with him. But yesterday he posted on social media and he said something about, I don't care who you marry. He's talking about same-sex marriage.
Uh-huh.
He said, and no one else should either. This is the 21st century. Let's all grow up.
Whoops.
And and had like 1,000 likes on it, and just almost unanimous approval from his base, which is, he's running as a conservative Republican in Michigan. Um, and I saw another kind of similar post from another Michigan politician who is a very uh, prominent conservative. Again, it was another similar statement saying like we have bigger issues to deal with, things like the economy and so on and so forth, and caring who people love. And those kinds of things are ways in which I think the Christian church has they have a humanistic worldview,
Yeah.
but they're professing Christians. And so if you go to church and you talk about the doctrine of justification, they'll probably be correct on that. But
Hmm.
then when you talk about social issues, they're off on most of those. Why? Because their whole information stream from their childhood is from the educational system, from social media, from TV, the podcasts they listen to, the talk shows, whatever. All
Yeah.
that is being informed by this other worldview, this anti-Christian worldview.
And like you said, if your education compartmentalizes this for 12 to 16 years and separates God from everything, then that's what you're going to do in your adult life. You're going to separate
Yeah,
God from everything instead of realizing that the family is kind of the foundation for all society instead of the opposite, which is what they're saying. I
yeah,
love
for
this
sure.
quote from the book. A Christian education is not merely tacking a Jesus bumper sticker onto a secular methodology. It is understanding that everything we study is a reflection of the marvelous creator who made all that is. I think that really sums up, everything we've talked about. That and I thought that, was true about Christian school, but it's really even in homeschooling, it's not just the Bible verses, it's every single subject looked at through the lens of scripture. I have a few quick questions I want you to answer from your
All right.
answers book. I just want
Okay.
to hit a couple of the highlights, the most common ones. So, what about the salt and light argument? My kids are going to be salt and light at the public school, so they need to be there. What do you say to that?
Sure. Yeah, just for clarity, so I wrote a book called Answers for Homeschooling, the top 25 questions critics ask. And I
Hmm.
basically took like the top 25 objections that people raised against homeschooling and tried to answer all of them. Salt and light, I mean, I had a chapter in the education book on this, or at least a section. I had a chapter in the answers book, and I kind of addressed it in very different ways in each book.
Hmm.
So I have a lot of answers to that. One of them is if this was a good theory and it worked, we'd have some kind of statistical data since we've been doing it for 75 years that show that it works. We don't
Yep.
have that. What we have is 75 years of data showing us that it's a failed method, it doesn't work, and we're losing generation after generation of Christian youth to the world.
Yep.
That they are converting our kids are not converting them. There are no studies that show that the salt and light theory is effective. So then that causes us to ask why it's not being effective, and the reason is because it's not biblically prescribed. And so I explain in the books why it's not biblically prescribed, and in the answers book, I talk about the education of Jesus. And I sort of say, like, if anybody was equipped to go be a missionary in a pagan school, it would have been Jesus, and yet his parents did not send him to a pagan school for
Exactly.
an education. And some people say, well, but they sent him to the Judaic schools, and he was sent to this school for this Judaic school for young men and so forth. And I actually have heard that said so many times over the years from pastors and people that they make that statement. I've always thought, where do we get that? Because the Bible doesn't say that. Like the Bible never says
Nope.
Jewish boys went to school. But you have you heard that, Nikki?
Yes.
Pastors or people say, right? And I'm like, where do they get that?
I've
So I
never
actually
read
did a
that, and
lot
I
of
have
research
read the
on it.
whole Bible.
Exactly. I've read the whole Bible. It's not in there. So I figure, were they getting it from the Talmud? Like, where are they getting it? Anyway, so I did a bunch of research on it, and I found that that simply was not true. Jesus was absolutely homeschooled. I explain how and why in the book. But
Mhm.
there was an experiment for 3 years where a guy named Gamaliel started these um, compulsory attendance schools. They were still religious schools, but for
Mhm.
boys in Jerusalem in AD 67, long after Jesus was already ascended. And it lasted 3 years until God destroyed Jerusalem in AD 70. So compulsory attendance schools in Judaism had a 3 year run from 67 to 70. And that's the history of these compulsory attendance schools for boys. It was not common for God's people in the Old Testament or even in the first century to send their children away to schools, even religious schools. And they never sent them to the pagan schools. And there were
No.
pagan schools of nations around them. They
Mhm.
never did that. But they didn't even send them to what we would consider to be church schools. They homeschooled their kids. And so
Mhm.
there's a lot of different answers to that. But I think the reason that it doesn't work is because it's not biblically prescribed. Our children are the mission field, they're not the missionaries.
Okay, what do you say about the socialization argument? I know there's several answers for that one, but what's your favorite one?
Oh man, it depends on what mood I'm in. Yeah, I have probably 15 answers to that one. One of
It's a
my
very old
favorites would be,
argument.
yeah, I think one of my favorites actually was the research that Brian Ray did from National Home Education Research Institute, where he did a study called Homeschooling Grows Up, and he did a study of 8,000 homeschooled graduates who had been homeschooled for 7 years or more and followed them into adulthood and found that they were more positively socially engaged in their
Mhm.
communities than students who are raised in public and private schools. So there's actually empirical data on that.
Mhm.
And the argument has a corollary where we presuppose that homeschoolers won't be socialized because they're not in a classroom of 30, 40 students, their own
Mhm.
age, as though that's a natural environment.
Yeah.
But then the net result of them not being properly socialized is they won't know how to interact in the real world. They won't be good citizens. And so that
Mhm.
study just debunked it.
Yeah.
It just showed that the most positively socially engaged individuals as adults in society were homeschooled graduates. And so then it takes it out of the realm of my opinion versus your opinion. Too, we actually have research on this, and that was something I tried pretty hard in my book to do was to
Mhm.
point towards studies because we have studies on almost all of these
Yeah.
issues, and the data does not support the bias. And most of the arguments against homeschooling are bias driven, not
Yeah.
empirically researched, evidence driven. And so I try to take it out of my opinion versus your opinion and say, well, let's just look at some facts.
That's good. Okay. What about the argument that says you can't shelter your children from the world?
I actually do.
Amen.
Come to my house, like watch me. Uh, you know, I love years ago there was this guy Marshall Fritz, and he started an organization. He's passed away now, but he started an organization called Separation of School and State.
Okay,
It's
I've heard
not.
that.
I don't know if it's still functioning or whatever. It was out in California years ago. I remember I asked Marshall that question one time, and he's like, "What are they going to accuse us of next? Feeding and clothing our children?" He's like, "Of course we're sheltering our children. It's our job. We're parents." I think the idea is, no, we're not going to shelter our children forever, but there's a time to let your children go, to release them into the world. It's not the age of 8. And I use that illustration a lot from Psalm 127 of like arrows in the hands of a mighty warrior are the children born in his youth, and how an arrow is an aggressive weapon and it's used to go farther than what that soldier can go himself and to penetrate the enemy's camp and do great damage to the kingdom of darkness, right? And that's the metaphor
Yeah.
that's being given of children of, they're gonna do great damage to the kingdom of darkness, right? And so we're raising them for that purpose. But I often use the illustration how these ancient warriors often fashioned their own arrows,
Hmm.
and it took a long time to get those arrows ready for war. And they didn't take those arrows out into battle until the arrows were completely ready and they knew that they would fly straight and true.
Yeah.
And what I see is people launching these arrows before the arrows are ready.
Hmm.
And that's just a recipe for disaster.
Amen. Okay, last question. I should get my tax dollars to homeschool.
Woo! Oh man, I've written so much on this. In fact, if you go to my website, familyrenewal.org, I have a blog that's like a compilation of blogs that I've written
Okay.
about this now. So it's kind of like a whole list of different ways I've addressed this issue all
Same.
in one. So if you just
Yeah.
go to familyrenewal.org and you type in school choice,
Hmm.
that one article will pop up and you can then go to all of the articles inside of it.
Okay.
So that's a great one stop. I write about school choice in education. I write about it also in answers, but from different angles.
Hmm.
And I guess I'll give this quick soundbite. What we need, the way to fight this battle, okay, is not to tell the government, please take our money and then give us some of our money back with government strings attached, telling us what we can buy and what we can use for it. And, okay, well, now we have to do standardized tests and now we have to have visits and with government workers to oversee our homeschool. Like, okay, right. We don't want to have them take our money, give us some money back with all these regulations on how we can use it. That's not it. That's not freedom. What we
No.
want is we want them to stop taking our money.
Hmm.
So if you can figure out a way to get the government to stop taking your money in the first place, that's where the fight needs to be.
Exactly.
So maybe that's like my soundbite, right? And it's like a really simplistic way to answer this because the topic is so huge, and there's like we
It
could
is.
spend hours just on that one topic of school choice. But I would say that stop thinking about you know, how can I get some of my money back from the government with all their regulations and strings attached, and think how do we fight this so that they just stop taking our money?
I
In order
agree.
to be for the idea of taking government money to educate your kids, you have to first accept that we need to continue this process of forced redistribution of wealth
Mhm.
to pay for education or educational welfare. And I'm not in favor of educational welfare, and I'm not in favor of forced redistribution of wealth, so I can't be for school choice. And
Amen.
I know that sounds simplistic, but I encourage people to go to, again, familyrenewal.org, type in school choice, and read the more full-length articles on that. And I appreciate the work that you've done on that, Nicki. And I want to say here, as we're entering the close of the podcast, you have emerged as one of the most important voices in the homeschool community. I think it's been maybe 5 years or so since we've really been communicating something
Yeah.
along that line. But in the last 5 years that you've kind of been on my radar, you have been a much needed voice of reason and balance, um,
Thank you.
because we've
That's an
gone through
honor coming from
pockets.
you.
We've gone through pockets of time I've been in this 30 years in the homeschool movement where we've had people who were for homeschooling.
Hmm.
Um, but some of those people didn't give us real good reasons why. And I'm not throwing rocks at them. I'm just
Yeah.
saying, they wanted to be nice and they want to be kind and kind of put the happy smiley face on, homeschooling's great. But but sometimes in order to be for something, you also have to kind of articulate the argument of what is it we're against. And I
Hmm.
think that hasn't sounded nice. And, I've had people say to me at homeschool conferences where I was invited to speak, like, it's fine for you to talk about homeschooling here. That's great. But just don't say anything bad about public schools. And I remember saying to one guy, I said, for me, that feels a lot like inviting a speaker to be the keynote speaker at your pro-life banquet and saying, we want you to talk about pro-life. Just don't say anything negative against abortion.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
And I think that there's just been people who have wanted to try to stay on the nice side of it
Hmm.
and haven't wanted to speak to the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
That we never should have started this government school practice in the first place. Like, it
Amen.
wasn't God's idea. It's not constitutional. It hasn't worked. It's only failed. The more money we've dumped into it, the worse it's gotten. It is not the solution. It's not the safety net. It is the problem.
Hmm.
And most people don't see that. They they are so, they grew up in it.
Hmm.
And when you're a
It's normal.
goldfish swimming in a goldfish bowl and someone asks you, what does it feel like to be wet? You have a hard time answering that because you're just so used to it. And so
Exactly.
I know your upbringing in many ways was different but similar to mine in certain ways. We didn't talk about the ways it was similar, but actually we did on my podcast. I had
Yeah.
you, for those who want to hear Nicki, go to YouTube, type in Family Renewal Podcast or Israel Wayne, Nicki Truesdell, and it'll pop up. There's a video where I interviewed you, and you can actually
Yeah.
hear her story. And we have a lot in common in certain ways. But we both grew up outside the matrix.
Yes.
And so, we're kind of telling people like, you're in the matrix. And they're like, no, we're not. And we're like, no, yeah, you kind of are. And
Yeah.
so it's been very refreshing. I've been doing this a long time, and there's been lots of times where I feel like in some ways it's been a lonely space, because, I've always kind of said the unpopular thing.
Yeah.
And, sometimes that's hurt me professionally and career wise and so forth. I don't get invited to certain things because of that. But I appreciate that you have emerged with a similar kind of voice to these
Thank you.
issues and have articulated some of the things that other people have just left unsaid. And you're one of the rare voices, and we're getting more now. I feel like we're getting some momentum.
Yeah.
There's a group of some great voices out there that are starting to say some of these things, but I think you're one of the most important in that mix. So I wanted to make sure
Thank
to
you.
say that while we're on air together.
It's an honor. I appreciate that coming from you. I owe a lot of that to my mom, because they were, they were the minority in the 80s,
Hmm.
and they were my mom and dad were outspoken about many things. And I grew up watching that. And so for me, it's like, hey, you got to speak the truth, It doesn't matter if people believe you. So they did definitely set the stage for that for me. Okay, so can you tell everyone where they can find you on online, where they can listen to you and read your stuff?
Well, for sure. So I'm on social media, almost anywhere on social media. You can look up Israel Wayne or Family Renewal. Love to connect with you there. We do have a YouTube channel called Family Renewal Podcast, where
Hmm.
I interview guests, and you can come check those out. And then our website is familyrenewal.org. We have a web store there. In fact, those two books that Nicki was talking about, we actually have what we call Christian Education Bundle. You just go
Yes.
to familyrenewal.org/store, or click the store button on our website. We have those two books together, discounted. And any
Okay.
books you buy from our website, I'll personally sign, which is something Amazon won't do for you. So we encourage you, if you buy from our website, that helps us the most. So a lot of people don't know this, but as a traditionally published author, if you buy one of my books on Amazon and it's like 13 bucks or whatever, I'll make like 65 cents.
Hmm.
I make almost nothing as an author when you buy my books on Amazon because they keep most of the profit, and that's why they own the world, right? But
Yes.
so we encourage you if you can, we'd appreciate it if you buy it from our website. I'll sign it as a thank you. And then I have a speaking website, which is my name. So Israel Wayne, Israel. Most people don't know how to spell that for some reason. It's like it's been a country for a
Unless they've
long
read the
time.
Bible their whole life,
Yeah,
then
I
they can
know. It's
spell
like,
it.
but anyway, israelwayne.com. And so if you're interested in having me come speak to your homeschool group, your church, or your family camp, or any kind of other event, all the information there to contact us and follow through with that is all at israelwayne.com. Oh, one other website I don't promote very much, but I should, is a website I run called christianworldview.net.
That's a good
And I
one.
have a blog on there with lots of articles. I haven't posted anything there real recently, but still a great archive of
It
biblical
is.
worldview topics, and then links to all kinds of organizations and ministries and speakers and topics and authors, people who do great work in different fields, and how the biblical worldview is applied to all those areas. So christianworldview.net is another website that I could direct you to.
Thank you. I'll put all of those in the show notes
Thank
so
you.
they'll be easy to find. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. It's always fun to talk to you, and I think our listeners will enjoy this.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate you asking me some questions that I don't typically get answered or asked about, like the worldview stuff. I think we covered some ground here that is exclusive to your show that we haven't talked about.
That's
It. I
better.
haven't talked about it anywhere else for a
It's
while.
my
So
favorite topic.
I'm grateful for that opportunity. It's mine too. I often say, if you cut me, I'll bleed homeschool vision. So I'm grateful for the opportunity. And I don't know why I feel compelled to say this. I am in the middle of writing. I'm actually almost done writing a high school philosophy curriculum.
Oh, wow.
It's a huge undertaking. It's taken me forever, but it's going to be out in a year or two. I don't know. I mean, I'm like 90% done with the writing. It's getting close to being finished on the writing part.
Okay.
Those projects take so long to go through
Yeah.
production. It's such a big project, but it's going to be high school, and it's all on philosophy. So we're talking about metaphysics and aesthetics and epistemology and logic,
Oh,
and deal with psychology and all these big
that's
topics. They're basically trying to
exciting.
prepare students who might be studying these things in college to get
Yes.
introduced to them ahead of time, but from a Christian framework, a biblical framework. And so
That
that's my
sounds,
thing I'm working on right now, and
oh,
would appreciate prayers for that, just for completion. And it's going to be a niche product. I know, not everybody's jazzed about having their child study philosophy, but I think for those who do have an interest in it, there's nothing else like it. There's no other.
no.
I looked, and there's nothing else like it on the market at all. So I think it's going to fill a great space.
I love that. I hope my youngest is still in school before it's out so she can take it. We're actually going
Yeah,
through
for
your
sure.
Foundations in Faith curriculum right now with both of the teenagers, and I love it. I wish I'd had this years ago with my older kids, but I really appreciate that. So I know this philosophy curriculum will be great.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, thank you so much, Nikki. I appreciate you and
Thank you.
everything you do. You're a blessing to the body of Christ, and it's always fun when we get to speak together at conferences. And I'm eager, the Lord willing, get you up here to Michigan to speak at our Michigan conference. I don't have a lot of pull with that, but I know you have fans up here. So Lord willing, we can get you at our state conference sometime.
Yeah, maybe so. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you. It was good to talk to you today.
All
Bye-bye.
right, good bless.
Thank you for listening to my podcast today. If you want more content like this, you can go to my website at nickitruesdell.com. That's NICKITRUESDELL.com. And find me on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.